A bankrupt billionaire gave shelter to two homeless twin sisters in his restaurant on Christmas Eve, only to be shocked by what they did the next day. The scent of truffle oil and foie gras lingered in the air, but to Thomas Dubois it smelled of defeat. His eyes, once filled with ambition, now clouded with melancholy as he gazed at the dining room of the Heights for the last time. "Mr. Dubois, the final guest has arrived," murmured Pierre, the maitre d', snapping him out of his thoughts. Thomas nodded, straightening his bow tie. The irony wasn't lost on him, his most prestigious restaurant, fully booked on Christmas Eve, yet he was bankrupt. With deliberate steps, Thomas crossed the dining hall. Each table was a memory, each patron a reminder of the empire he had built and lost. Reaching the table of the last customer, he forced a smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Heights. I'm Thomas Dubois, and it will be my honor to serve you personally tonight." The guest, an older man with silver hair, raised his eyebrows. "The Thomas Dubois, the billionaire chef?" Thomas felt his stomach turn. Ex-billionaire, I'm afraid, but still a chef, at least for tonight. As he presented the tasting menu, flashbacks overwhelmed him. 10 years ago, Thomas was at the pinnacle of the culinary world. His Michelin-starred restaurants spanned New York, London, and Tokyo. Business magazines featured his face, hailing him as the world's first billionaire chef. The memory dissolved, replaced by a more recent and painful one. 2 years ago, he expanded too aggressively. New restaurants opened at a breakneck pace. Risky loans piled up. A scathing review of his Tokyo concept marked the beginning of the end. Thomas blinked, returning to the present. The guest had already made his selection. "An excellent choice, sir. We'll start with an amuse-bouche of..." The night dragged on, and Thomas moved like a ghost of Christmas past among the tables. Every dish was a masterpiece. Every smile a mask hiding a broken heart. At 11:45 p.m., the last guest left. Thomas stood alone in the dining room, staring at the breathtaking cityscape below. Pierre approached hesitantly. "Sir, it's time." Thomas nodded, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. Slowly, he walked to the restaurant's entrance. His hand trembled as it reached the doorknob. With a final click, the door shut. The Heights, the crown jewel of his fallen empire, was officially closed. Thomas turned to his assembled staff, chefs, servers, sommeliers, all silent, waiting for his final words. "My friends," he began, his voice unsteady, "you were the soul of this restaurant. Every Michelin star, every glowing review, every satisfied smile, it was all because of you. I'm sorry I failed you." Silent tears streaked some faces. Others maintained their professional composure to the end. "But remember," Thomas continued, squaring his shoulders, "what we created here wasn't just food. It was art. It was passion. It was..." His voice faltered. Pierre stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It was family, chef. We were family." Thomas nodded, unable to speak. One by one, the staff approached him. Some offered words of comfort, others a silent handshake. When the last person left, Thomas was alone. Wandering through the now silent kitchen, his fingers brushed the gleaming utensils, the pristine counters. Every pan, every knife had a story. Every corner of this kitchen held memories of culinary triumphs, shared laughter, and realized dreams. Reaching his office, Thomas opened the safe one final time. Inside, a bottle of Chateau Margaux 1945 awaited him, his most prized possession, reserved for a special occasion. "What the hell?" he muttered, opening the bottle. Pouring himself a generous glass, he returned to the dining room. The bells of St. Patrick's Cathedral chimed midnight, Christmas. Raising his glass to the city's twinkling lights, Thomas toasted, "Merry Christmas, New York." As the wine touched his lips, a single tear rolled down his cheek. Its taste was that of years of hard work, dreams achieved and lost, and an uncertain future. Setting the empty glass on a table, Thomas Dubois, once a billionaire, once the owner of a culinary empire, now just a broken man, walked toward the exit. Locking the door for the last time, He didn't look back. The click of the lock echoed in the empty hallway, sealing the end of an era. Outside, snow began to fall softly on the city. Thomas pulled up his coat collar against the cold and took his first tentative steps into the unknown. What would fate have in store for him now? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. For Thomas Dubois, this would be a Christmas he would never forget. Snow fell silently over New York, covering the city in a cold white blanket. Thomas Dubois wandered aimlessly through the deserted streets, his footsteps echoing in the Christmas night. The expensive wine he'd sipped earlier hadn't warmed the chill within him. Every shop window decked out for the holidays, every twinkling light on the trees along Fifth Avenue, was a cruel reminder of what he'd lost. Just a year ago, Thomas would have been at a lavish party, toasting the success of his culinary empire. Now he was alone, bankrupt, drifting like a ghost through a city that once adored him. "How could I have been so foolish?" he muttered to himself, his breath forming small clouds in the frosty air. His thoughts spiraled back to impulsive decisions, unnecessary risks, and the arrogance that had blinded him. Every step in the snow felt like treading on the shards of his shattered dreams. Turning a corner, Thomas found himself on a narrow, dimly lit street. The contrast to the glittering avenues he'd just left was striking. Here the shadows felt deeper, the cold more biting. That's when he heard it, a muffled sob, almost inaudible. Thomas stopped, straining his ears. There it was again, a fragile sound coming from a nearby alley. Hesitant, he approached. At the far end of the alley, partially hidden behind a dumpster, were two small figures huddled together. Two girls, clinging to each other, shivering violently. Thomas's heart raced. "Oh my God," he whispered, taking a step closer. The girls flinched at the movement, pressing themselves further against the wall. The older one, no more than 10 years old, positioned herself protectively in front of the younger. "Don't come any closer," the older girl shouted, her voice trembling with both fear and cold. Thomas raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. Are you lost?" The younger girl, who looked about 7, peeked out from behind her sister. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Kawita, we have nowhere to go," the older one answered hesitantly. Thomas felt as though he'd been punched in the stomach. Children, alone on New York streets on Christmas night. The absurdity of it hit him like a freight train. "My name is Thomas," he said, crouching to their level. "What are your names?" The older girl hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm Claire. This is my sister, Sophie." Sophie sobbed again, burying her face into her sister's shoulder. "You must be freezing," Thomas said, noticing the girl's blue lips and thin, inadequate clothing. "I have a warm place not far from here. I can take you there if you'd like." Claire narrowed her eyes, distrust evident. "So we can't go with strangers," Thomas nodded, respecting her caution. "You're right to be careful, but I promise I only want to help. Look, I'll stay right here while you think about it, okay?" He stepped back a bit, giving the girls some space. Claire and Sophie whispered to each other, occasionally glancing at Thomas. As he waited, Thomas couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. Hours ago, he was the owner of a multi-million-dollar culinary empire. Now, he was in a dirty alley, trying to convince 2 homeless children to trust him. Finally, Claire spoke up. "Where do you want to take us?" "I have a restaurant not far from here," Thomas replied. "It's closed now, but it's warm and safe. You can stay the night there, and tomorrow we can figure out what to do next." The girls exchanged another look. Sophie tugged on her sister's sleeve, silently pleading. Claire sighed, worn down by the cold and exhaustion. "Okay, but if you try anything funny, we'll scream and run." Thomas couldn't help but smile at the girl's bravado. "Deal." Slowly, the girls stepped out from behind the dumpster. Under the street lamp's light, Thomas could see them more clearly. Their clothes were tattered, their shoes worn thin. Claire had a bruise on her face, partially hidden by strands of unkempt hair. "Come on," Thomas said gently, resisting the urge to pick up Sophie, who looked too tired to walk. The small group made their way through the streets of New York. Thomas noticed how Claire kept Sophie close, her eyes constantly scanning the surroundings for danger. It was heartbreaking, a child forced to grow up too quickly, bearing the weight of the world on her small shoulders. Finally, they arrived at the heights. Thomas unlocked the door, hesitating for a moment before stepping inside. Just hours ago, he'd left this place a defeated man. Now he returned with an unexpected purpose. "Come in," he said, holding the door open. Claire and Sophie entered cautiously, their eyes wide at the restaurant's grandeur. Thomas flipped on a few lights, revealing the elegant interior. "Wow," Sophie whispered, her voice filled with awe. Thomas smiled, remembering how he'd felt seeing the restaurant for the first time. "Come on, let's head to the kitchen. I can make you something warm to eat." Leading the girls through the dining room, Thomas felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, perhaps a sense of purpose, maybe even hope. In the kitchen, while heating soup and preparing sandwiches, Thomas kept an eye on the sisters. Claire remained wary, but Sophie had begun to relax, her eyelids heavy with sleep. "You're safe here," Thomas said gently. "I promise." Claire met his gaze, searching for any sign of deceit. After a moment, she gave a small nod. As the girls devoured the food ravenously, Thomas couldn't help but wonder about their story. He had no idea how he would help these children, or what the next day would bring. But one thing he knew for sure, his life had irrevocably changed this Christmas Eve. And for the first time in a long while, Thomas Dubois felt that perhaps, just perhaps, that wasn't such a bad thing. The silence of the heights was broken by the soft clinking of utensils and the low murmurs of voices. Thomas Dubois, once a celebrated chef and now a man on the brink of ruin, found himself once again in his kitchen. But this time, he wasn't preparing elaborate dishes for discerning critics or finicky celebrities. He was making a simple meal for 2 starving street kids. "I'm sorry there's not much here," Thomas said, rummaging through nearly empty cabinets. "Most of the food was donated or discarded when we closed." Claire, the older sister, watched Thomas's every move with sharp, cautious eyes. Sophie, on the other hand, had succumbed to exhaustion and was sleeping soundly on a makeshift bed of folded tablecloths. Thomas managed to scrounge up some eggs, a bit of aged cheese, a few slices of bread, and a can of tomatoes. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. "I'll make an omelette and some toast," he announced, mostly to himself. As Thomas worked, he noticed Claire slowly inching closer, her curiosity overpowering her fear. She watched intently as he whisked the eggs with precision, diced the cheese into perfect cubes, and controlled the stove's flame expertly. "Do you like cooking?" Thomas asked softly, not wanting to scare her off. Claire shrugged, but her eyes lit up. "Sometimes I cooked for Sophie and when we had food." Thomas's heart tightened. He pictured this 10-year-old girl trying to care for her younger sister under unimaginable circumstances. "Well, you're doing a great job observing," he said with a gentle smile. "Want to help me with the toast?" Hesitant, Claire nodded. Thomas showed her how to slice the bread evenly and brush it with a bit of olive oil before placing it on the grill. As they worked side by side, Thomas couldn't help but notice how deftly Claire's small hands moved. She had a natural talent, even if she didn't yet realize it. Finally, the meal was ready. Thomas gently woke Sophie, and the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table. The girls ate with a voracious appetite that broke Thomas's heart. How many meals had they missed? How long had they been on the streets? After a few minutes of silence, broken only by the sounds of chewing, Thomas decided to try starting a conversation. "So," he began casually, "are you 2 from New York?" Claire swallowed a bite of omelette before replying. "No," she said simply. Thomas waited, but no further elaboration came. He tried again. "Jean, do you have family here?" Sophie glanced at Claire, who shook her head slightly. "No," the younger girl whispered. Thomas could sense there was much more to their story, but the girls were clearly not ready to share. He decided not to push. "Well," he said, aiming to sound reassuring, "you're safe here for now. Tomorrow we'll figure things out together." Claire put down her fork, her face suddenly tense. "You're not going to call the cops, are you?" The question caught Thomas off guard. I don't know," he admitted. "You don't want me to." No, Claire exclaimed, her tone urgent. Sophie began to cry silently. Thomas raised his hands in a calming gesture. Okay, okay. I won't call anyone without talking to you first. I promise. The girls seemed to relax slightly, though Thomas could see the tension still lingering. There was clearly more to their story than they were ready to share. To ease the tension, Thomas decided to change the subject. So Claire, did you enjoy helping with the toast? A faint smile crossed Claire's face. Yeah, she said shyly. It was fun. Thomas smiled back. You've got a knack for it. Maybe tomorrow we can try cooking something a bit more elaborate together. What do you think? For the first time since he'd met her, Thomas saw a genuine smile light up Claire's face. I'd like that, she said. After the meal, Thomas improvised beds for the girls using tablecloths and cushions from the dining chairs. It wasn't ideal, but it was far better than the cold alley they had been sleeping in. I'll be in the office right over there, Thomas said, pointing to a nearby door. If you need anything, just call me. The girls nodded, already curling up in their makeshift beds. Thomas watched them for a moment, feeling a swirl of emotions he couldn't quite name. Compassion, worry, but also something else, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. As he retreated to his office, Thomas couldn't help but think about the strange irony of his situation. Just 24 hours ago, he was a broken man, lost and directionless. Now, he found himself responsible for two vulnerable young lives. Sitting in his chair, Thomas glanced at the framed photo on his desk, a picture of himself, years younger, receiving his first culinary award. He remembered the passion, the dedication, the sense of purpose he'd felt back then. Perhaps, he thought, looking toward the kitchen where the girls were now sleeping. The universe was giving him a second chance, not to rebuild his culinary empire, but to do something truly meaningful. With that thought, Thomas Dubois drifted off to sleep in his chair, exhausted but being for the first time in years, hopeful about tomorrow. The night crept on in the heights, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old building and the soft snore of Thomas Dubois as he dozed in his office chair. The once billionaire chef, now bankrupt, had succumbed to the emotional exhaustion of the day. But around 3 a.m., a faint sound pierced through his sleep. Whispering. Thomas opened his eyes slowly, momentarily disoriented. Then the memories of the previous night flooded back. Claire and Sophie, the two homeless sisters he had taken in. Quietly, Thomas rose from his chair, his muscles protesting from the uncomfortable sleeping position. He approached the office door, which he'd left slightly ajar, and listened carefully. We can't stay, Claire. Sophie's trembling voice barely carried through the air. I know, but... Claire hesitated. It's so warm here, and he seems nice. Do you remember what happened the last time we trusted an adult? Sophie's voice carried a surprising maturity for her 7 years. Thomas felt his heart clench. What had these children been through to make them so distrustful? I know, Claire replied, frustration and resignation mixed in her tone. But what if this time it's different? There was a moment of silence, and Thomas could almost feel the weight of the decision hanging between the two sisters. We can't risk it, Sophie finally said. We have to stick to the plan. We'll leave before sunrise. Thomas stepped back, his mind racing. A plan. Where could these two young girls possibly go in the freezing city streets? Returning quietly to his chair, Thomas wrestled with the dilemma now facing him. Part of him, the rational, responsible part, knew he should call the authorities immediately. These girls needed professional help, a safe place to stay, perhaps even medical attention. But another part of him, the part that had been touched by their vulnerability and courage, hesitated. If he called the authorities, they'd be taken into the system. Would they be separated, sent to different foster homes? What had driven them to the streets in the first place? Clearly, they were running from something or someone. Thomas ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on him. Just 24 hours ago, his biggest concern was the collapse of his culinary empire. Now, he was faced with the fate of two young lives. He glanced at the phone on his desk. It would be so easy to make the call, to hand over the responsibility to someone else. But then he remembered the look in Claire's eyes as she watched him cook, the shy smile on Sophie's face as she ate. These girls had trusted him, even if just a little. Could he really betray that trust? Taking a deep breath, Thomas made his decision. He wouldn't call the authorities, not yet. First, he'd try to earn their trust, to understand their story. Maybe there was a way he could help them that the system couldn't. Determined, he rose again and walked silently to the kitchen. The girls had stopped whispering, and he could hear their soft, even breaths, indicating they had fallen asleep again. He sat down on a nearby chair, resolved to keep watch for the rest of the night. He wouldn't let them slip away into the cold and danger of the streets, not while he could do something about it. As the hours crept by, Thomas reflected on the surreal events of the past 24 hours. How quickly life could change so drastically. Just yesterday, he was a defeated man, directionless. Now he found himself the impromptu guardian of 2 homeless children. His thoughts wandered to his own past. Thomas had never married, never had children. His career had always been his top priority. Now, as he looked at the 2 girls sleeping soundly nearby, he wondered if he had missed something important in life. The sky was beginning to lighten when Thomas heard movement. Claire was stirring, her eyes slowly opening before widening as she noticed Thomas sitting there. "Good morning," Thomas said softly, trying not to startle her. Claire sat up quickly, shaking Sophie awake. "What? Why are you here?" she asked, suspicion evident in her voice. Thomas took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. "I overheard you talking earlier," he admitted, "about leaving before sunrise." Claire's face turned pale, and Sophie, now awake, clutched her sister's arm. "I'm not going to stop you if you really want to leave," Thomas said quickly, "but I'd like you to stay, at least for a little while. It's cold out there, and here you have food and shelter." The sisters exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. "Why?" Claire finally asked. "Why do you care?" The question caught Thomas off guard. Why did he care? He barely knew these girls. And yet, "Because everyone deserves a chance," he answered honestly. "I've had many chances in life. Some I took, some I wasted, but you're too young not to have any chances at all." Claire studied him for a long moment, as if trying to read his soul. Finally, she gave a small nod. "We'll stay, for now," she said, "but if you try to split us up or send us back—" "I won't do anything without talking to you first," Thomas promised. "Do you have my word?" A small smile appeared on Sophie's face. "Can we have breakfast?" she asked. Thomas couldn't help but smile. "Of course. In fact, how about we all cook together?" Claire's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and even Sophie looked excited. As they headed to the kitchen, Thomas felt a wave of relief and something else. Hope, perhaps. He didn't know what the future held for him or these 2 girls, but for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to finding out. The day was just beginning, and with it, perhaps, a new chance for all of them. The clock on the kitchen wall read 3:27 a.m. when Thomas awoke with a start. He had fallen asleep in his chair, worn out from the emotional strain. For a moment, panic gripped him as he feared the girls had left, but then he heard a faint noise coming from the kitchen. Rising quietly, Thomas made his way toward the sound. As he stepped into the kitchen, an unexpected sight greeted him. Claire, standing on a stool, scrubbing a pot with determination. "Claire," Thomas called softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl turned quickly, almost losing her balance on the stool. Her eyes were wide with a mix of fear and resolve. I just wanted to help," she stammered, stepping down from the stool. "I'm sorry if I woke you." Thomas shook his head, a gentle smile forming on his lips. "You don't need to apologize. But why are you cleaning in the middle of the night?" Claire lowered her gaze, nervously fiddling with the hem of her worn shirt. I like kitchens. I always wanted to work in one." The admission surprised Thomas. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "Really? What do you like about kitchens?" Claire's face brightened slightly. "Everything. The smells, the sounds, the way everything has its place. It's like magic." Thomas felt his heart warm at her enthusiasm. It was like looking into a mirror of his younger self, before fame and fortune had dulled his original passion. "You know," he said, leaning forward slightly, I started my career washing dishes in a restaurant not too different from this one. Claire's eyes widened. Really? How did you become a chef? Thomas chuckled softly. A lot of practice, hard work, and a little bit of luck. But it all started with a love for the kitchen, just like you. Claire smiled shyly, but her face soon turned serious again. But now, I don't know if I'll ever get to work in a real kitchen. Thomas's smile faded. Why do you say that, Claire? The girl hesitated, biting her lower lip. Lower. Thomas could see the internal struggle in her eyes, the desire to trust battling against years of mistrust. Do you promise not to tell anyone? Claire finally whispered, her voice barely audible. Thomas nodded solemnly. I promise. Claire took a deep breath before speaking. Sophie and we ran away from an orphanage. Thomas felt his heart tighten. He had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was still painful. Why did you run? He asked gently. Claire's eyes filled with tears. They were mean to us. They hit us, didn't give us enough food. And, she hesitated, struggling to continue, they were going to separate us. They wanted to send Sophie to another city. Thomas felt a surge of anger rise in his chest. How could anyone treat children this way? I promised our mom I'd always take care of Sophie, Claire continued, her voice breaking. I couldn't let them separate us. Thomas hesitated, then gently placed a hand on Claire's shoulder when she didn't pull away. Oh, you're very brave, Aunt Claire, taking care of your sister like that. Claire sniffled, wiping her tears on her sleeve. But now I don't know what to do. We can't go back there, but we can't live on the streets forever either. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. These girls needed more help than he initially realized. Claire, he said softly, what happened to you was terrible and unfair. No child should have to go through that. But I want you to know, as long as you're here, you're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you or separate you. Claire's eyes filled with a mixture of hope and doubt. You promise? Thomas nodded solemnly. I promise. And you know what? Tomorrow, how about we start teaching you some basics of cooking? Maybe we can even make a special lunch together. Claire's face lit up with a genuine smile, the first Thomas had seen since meeting her. I'd love that. Great, Thomas smiled back. But for now, let's get back to bed. Chefs need their rest to create amazing dishes, Claire nodded, stepping off the stool. Before leaving the kitchen, she turned to Thomas. Thank you, she said softly, for listening and for not judging us. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. Anytime, Claire, anytime. As he watched Claire return to her makeshift bed in the dining room, Thomas grew pensive. The story of Claire and Sophie was more complex and heartbreaking than he could have imagined. They needed more than just temporary shelter. They needed a home, safety, and a chance to be kids again. Thomas looked around the kitchen, the place that had been the heart of his culinary empire for so long. Now it could become the heart of something much more important, a family. With that thought, Thomas returned to his vigil chair. Dawn was approaching, and with it, the need for difficult decisions. But for now, he allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could make a difference in these girls' lives. And perhaps in the process, they could save something in him he hadn't realized needed saving. The aroma of burnt toast and strong coffee woke Thomas from his light sleep. For a moment, he felt disoriented, his mind caught between dream and reality. Then, the memories of the previous night rushed back, Claire's confession, Sophie's quiet vulnerability. Rising quickly from his makeshift office chair, Thomas headed to the kitchen, his heart pounding with a mix of worry and curiosity. As he entered, the scene before him stopped him in his tracks. Claire stood on a stool, her tongue between her teeth in concentration, trying to flip an omelette in a frying pan. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, watching her sister with a mix of admiration and apprehension. Good morning, Thomas said softly, not wanting to startle the girls. Claire turned quickly, nearly dropping the pan. Oh, I wanted to surprise you, she stammered, her face flushing with embarrassment. Thomas stepped closer, taking in the state of the kitchen. Flour was scattered across the counter, eggshells littered the floor, and a pile of blackened toast sat in the corner. The omelette in the pan was far from perfect, but the effort was clear. That's very thoughtful of you, Claire, Thomas said, genuinely touched by her gesture. I can see you worked hard. Claire lowered her eyes, clearly disappointed in herself. But it's all a mess, and I burned the toast. Thomas knelt beside the stool, bringing himself to her eye level. Hey, look at me, he said gently. When Claire met his gaze, he continued, Do you know how many times I burned toast when I was learning, or how many omelettes stuck to the pan? Claire's eyes widened in surprise. But you're a famous chef, Thomas chuckled softly. I am now, but I wasn't always. Everyone starts somewhere, Claire. The important thing is not to give up and to keep trying. A small smile began to form on Claire's lips. So, you're not mad about the mess? Of course not, Thomas assured her. In fact, I'm really impressed with your initiative. But next time, how about we cook together? That way I can teach you some tricks. Claire's face lit up with enthusiasm. Really? You'd teach me? Thomas nodded, smiling. Of course. But first, let's save this breakfast, okay? Over the next few minutes, Thomas guided Claire patiently, showing her how to adjust the heat to avoid burning the omelette, how to flip it without spilling, and how to add a touch of herbs for extra flavor. Sophie, curious, joined in, helping set the table. When they finally sat down to eat, the meal was far from perfect, but the room was filled with laughter and a sense of accomplishment. So, Thomas began, between bites of toast, you mentioned something about a plan last night. Was this it? Preparing breakfast? Claire nodded shyly. Yes. We wanted to thank you for helping us. Most people don't even look at us on the street, let alone give us food and a place to stay. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. The genuine gratitude in the girl's eyes was overwhelming. You don't have to thank me. What I did, well, it's the least anyone decent would do. Sophie, who had been quiet until now, spoke softly. But not everyone is decent like you. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Thomas realized these girls had seen the darkest sides of humanity, a reality no child should endure. Clearing his throat to break the tension, Thomas turned to Claire. So you said you like kitchens. What else would you like to learn? Claire's eyes sparkled with excitement. Everything. How to make sauces, how to chop vegetables properly, how to bake the perfect cake. Thomas couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. Well, we have a lot to cover then. How about we start with something simple today? We could make ratatouille for lunch. It's a classic French dish, full of vegetables and flavor. Rata what? Sophie asked, scrunching her nose in confusion. Thomas laughed. Ratatouille. Trust me, it's delicious. And the best part is, you can get really creative with how you present it. The next few hours flew by as Thomas walked Claire, and occasionally Sophie, through the fundamentals of making ratatouille. He taught Claire how to hold a knife correctly, how to cut vegetables evenly, and how to season each layer to bring out the flavors. Watching Claire absorb every word and technique with such eagerness, Thomas felt something stir inside him. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of sharing knowledge and seeing the spark of understanding in a learner's eyes. When the dish was finally in the oven, the kitchen was a mess, but the air was filled with laughter and anticipation. So now comes the hardest part, Thomas said dramatically. What? Claire asked, eager. Waiting, he replied with a grin. As the aroma of ratatouille filled the kitchen, Thomas reflected on the surreal events of the past day. Yesterday, he was a broken man, lost and purposeless. Today, he found himself teaching cooking to 2 homeless girls in his closed restaurant on Christmas morning. Life had a strange way of offering second chances, he thought. Perhaps this was his, not just to redeem himself from past mistakes, but to do something truly meaningful. Looking at Claire and Sophie, who were now debating how to set the table for lunch, Thomas felt a wave of determination. He didn't know what the future held, but he was certain of one thing. He would do everything in his power to protect and care for these girls. The oven timer beeped, snapping Thomas back to the present. All right, girls, he announced. Let's see how our ratatouille turned out. As they prepared to taste their creation, Thomas couldn't help but think this might be the beginning of something special. Not just a new chapter in his life, but the start of an unlikely family brought together by love of food and the need for belonging. The aroma of freshly baked ratatouille filled the air in the Heights kitchen. Thomas, Claire, and Sophie sat around the kitchen table, savoring the fruits of their labor. As they ate, Thomas observed with pride as Claire explained the different flavors and textures to Sophie with excitement. "See, Sophie, the thyme gives it that special taste, and the eggplant gets soft but not too mushy. Here it's like a dance of flavors in your mouth," Claire exclaimed, her eyes shining with joy. Thomas couldn't help but smile. Claire's natural ability to articulate culinary concepts was remarkable, especially for someone so young and with no formal training. "Claire, you have an excellent palate," Thomas praised. "Many adults can't identify flavors as well as you." Claire's face lit up at the compliment, but a shadow quickly passed over her expression. At the orphanage, the food was always so bland. "I used to imagine what it would be like to cook real meals like the ones I saw on TV." Thomas's smile faltered. "You ever watched cooking shows at the orphanage?" Sophie, who had been quietly eating, spoke up. "Sometimes, when the staff wasn't looking, they said it was a waste of time, that we should be doing chores." Thomas felt a pang of sadness. The image of two young girls secretly watching cooking shows, dreaming of a better life, was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "Claire always said she wanted to work in a real kitchen one day," Sophie continued, looking at her sister with admiration. "She even practiced with whatever we could find in the orphanage kitchen." Claire blushed, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "It wasn't a big deal. I just wanted to make meals a little better for the younger kids." Thomas remained silent for a moment, taking in what he'd just learned. He realized he had greatly underestimated not only Claire's talent, but also her maturity and determination. "Claire," he said gently, "what you did, caring for the younger kids, trying to improve their meals, that's incredible. Many professional chefs don't have half your dedication." Claire looked at him, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Really? You don't think it's silly?" Thomas shook his head emphatically. "Not at all. In fact, I'm impressed. You have a natural gift and a genuine passion for cooking. That's rare and very special." The room fell silent, except for the occasional clink of utensils. Thomas could see the wheels turning in Claire's mind as she processed his words. "You know," Thomas began after a moment, "when I was young, I also dreamed of working in big restaurants. Back then it seemed impossible." "How did you do it?" Claire asked, leaning forward eagerly. Thomas smiled, recalling his early days in the culinary world. "Through hard work, persistence, and a bit of luck. I started washing dishes in a small bistro, but whenever I had the chance, I watched the chefs, asked questions, and practiced at home." Claire's eyes sparkled with admiration and hope. "Do you think I could do that someday?" At that moment, Thomas had a revelation. Looking at Claire, he didn't just see a homeless girl. He saw a budding chef, someone with the passion and talent waiting to be nurtured. He realized he had the ability to help her achieve her dreams. "Claire," he said with conviction, "not only do I think you can do it, but I'd like to help you get there." Claire and Sophie exchanged stunned glances. "What do you mean?" Claire asked, hardly daring to believe him. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes filled with purpose. "How about starting to learn from me, for real, not just simple recipes? I can teach you everything about professional cooking, running a kitchen, creating menus, everything." Before he could finish, Claire jumped up from her chair, tears streaming down her face. For a terrifying moment, Thomas thought he'd upset her, but then, to his surprise, she ran to him and hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she sobbed into his chest. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Thomas, initially taken aback, gently returned the hug. He glanced at Sophie, who was smiling through teary eyes, her gratitude evident. "And Sophie," Thomas said, extending an arm to include her in the embrace, "this goes for you too, if you want to learn, of course." Sophie laughed softly through her tears. "I think I'd rather eat than cook, but can I be the official taste tester?" They all laughed together, the sound filling the kitchen with warmth and joy. When they finally pulled apart, Thomas looked into Claire's eyes, seeing a mix of gratitude, determination, and hope. "Claire," he said seriously, "this won't be easy. Being a chef takes a lot of work, dedication, and sacrifice. There will be tough days, moments of doubt, but if you're willing to try, I'll be here to support you every step of the way. Claire nodded, wiping her tears with her sleeve. I want this. I've always wanted this, and I promise I'll work hard. Thomas smiled, feeling a swell of pride he hadn't felt in years. Then it's settled. Starting tomorrow, you'll officially be my apprentice. As they finished their now cold meal, Thomas found himself reflecting on the unexpected twists life could take. Just 2 days ago, he was a man on the brink of despair. Now, he had a new purpose and the chance to shape a young talent's future. Looking at Claire and Sophie, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope for the future. Hope for redemption. And hope for a new family formed under the most unlikely circumstances. The bankrupt chef, the aspiring young cook, and her protective sister. An improbable combination, to be sure. But as he watched the girls animatedly discuss what they wanted to learn first, Thomas couldn't help but think this was the start of something truly special. The future was uncertain, with many questions left unanswered. But in that moment, in the sunlit kitchen of the Heights, with the aroma of ratatouille still lingering and the sound of childish laughter echoing through the room, Thomas Dubois felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Night fell over New York, wrapping the city in a blanket of twinkling lights and elongated shadows. At the Heights, Thomas sat in his office, his gaze fixed on the window but his mind far from the panoramic view of the city. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions, the joy of cooking with Claire and Sophie, the revelation of Claire's natural talent, and the impulsive promise Thomas had made to mentor her. Now, with the girls sleeping peacefully in the dining room, the reality of the situation began to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Thomas sighed deeply, running his hands over his tired face. What was he doing? Just 3 days ago, he was a celebrated chef and businessman, concerned only with restaurant reviews and financial reports. Now, sir, he was responsible for 2 vulnerable children fleeing from a system that had failed them. Logic told him to call the authorities immediately. It was the right and legal thing to do. The girls needed professional assistance, a stable home, and formal education, things he, a bankrupt chef with a closed restaurant, could hardly provide. But then, he remembered the light in Claire's eyes as she talked about cooking, and Sophie's tentative smile as she watched them prepare breakfast. How could he simply hand them over to a system that had already hurt them so much? Rising from his chair, Thomas began pacing the small office. He was at a crossroads, and whatever decision he made would affect not only his life but the future of these 2 girls. After several minutes of internal debate, Thomas made up his mind. He couldn't make a definitive decision without more information. He needed to investigate the situation at the orphanage, understand what the girls had been through, and explore their options. With renewed determination, Thomas powered on his computer. He would spend the night researching, making discreet calls to contacts he still had in the city. He needed facts, a clear picture of the situation before he decided what to do next. Hours passed quickly as Thomas dove deeper into his investigation. What he discovered horrified him. The orphanage Claire and Sophie had fled from had a history of complaints, allegations of neglect, mistreatment, and even abuse that had been swept under the rug. The authorities had turned a blind eye, and the children continued to suffer. As the first rays of sunlight began creeping through the office window, Thomas had made his decision. He couldn't, in good conscience, send the girls back to that place, but he also knew he couldn't simply keep them hidden forever. He needed a plan. The smell of freshly brewed coffee pulled him from his thoughts. Surprised, Thomas stood and walked to the kitchen, where he found Claire already awake, preparing breakfast. "Good morning," she said timidly when she saw him. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to practice what you taught me yesterday." Thomas smiled, feeling a wave of affection for the determined young girl. "Not at all. In fact, I'm impressed by your initiative." Claire smiled back, but Thomas noticed a shadow of worry in her eyes. "So, what happens now?" she asked hesitantly. Thomas took a deep breath. It was time for the difficult conversation. "Why don't we finish making breakfast and talk together? Could you wake Sophie?" Minutes later, the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table, A simple but appetizing breakfast spread before them. Thomas could feel the tension in the air, the fear of the unknown weighing heavily on the girls. "And Claire, Sophie," Thomas began gently, "I spent the night thinking about our situation. I know you're scared and uncertain about the future. To be honest, I am too." The girls exchanged nervous glances but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "What happened to you at that orphanage is unacceptable," Thomas continued, his voice firm. "No child should have to endure that. I want you to know that I will not send you back there." Claire let out an audible sigh of relief, and Sophie squeezed her sister's hand under the table. "But," Thomas went on, "our current situation isn't sustainable in the long term. I can't keep hiding you here. It wouldn't be legal, and more importantly, it wouldn't be what's best for you." Fear returned to their eyes. "You're going to turn us in," Sophie whispered. Thomas shook his head. "No, I won't. At least, not now. What I propose is this. You stay here with me temporarily. During that time, I'll investigate the situation further and look into legal options to help you. Meanwhile, Claire, if you're still interested, I can start teaching you more about cooking." Claire's eyes lit up at the mention of cooking, but hesitation lingered on her face. "How long can we stay?" she asked. Thomas considered for a moment. "Let's start with 1 month. That will give me time to gather information and make plans. At the end of that month, we'll sit down again and decide the next steps together. How does that sound?" The girls looked at each other, having a silent conversation Thomas couldn't decipher. Finally, Claire spoke. "And what if, at the end of the month, you decide you don't want us around anymore?" Thomas's heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice. He leaned forward, looking directly into both girls' eyes. "Claire, Sophie, I want you to understand something. No matter what happens, I will always try to do what's best for you. I won't abandon you or send you back to a bad situation. We're in this together now, okay?" His words seemed to reach them. Silent tears rolled down Sophie's cheeks, and Claire struggled to maintain her composure. "Okay," Claire finally said, her voice shaky but resolute. "We'll stay." Thomas felt a weight lift from his shoulders. This was just the beginning, and he knew there would be many challenges ahead. But for now, it was a step in the right direction. "Great," he said with a smile, trying to lighten the mood. "Now, how about we start our day with a cooking project? Claire, what do you think about learning how to make croissants from scratch?" Claire's face brightened instantly. "Really? Real croissants?" Thomas chuckled, feeling lighter than he had in days. "Real croissants? And Sophie, you can be our official taste tester. How does that sound?" Sophie wiped her tears and smiled timidly. "I think I can handle that." As the three of them moved to the kitchen to begin their culinary adventure, Thomas couldn't help but marvel at how quickly his life had changed. Just a few days ago, he was a man lost in despair. Now he was responsible for 2 young lives and felt a renewed sense of purpose. Claire eagerly tied on an apron, her face glowing with excitement as Thomas began explaining the process of making croissants from scratch. Sophie sat nearby, watching intently, occasionally offering her opinion on how the pastries might taste. Over the next few hours, the kitchen came alive with activity. Thomas guided Claire through every step of the process, from mixing the dough to carefully folding and rolling it to create the delicate, buttery layers. "Remember," Thomas said as he demonstrated the folding technique, "patience is key. Good things take time, especially in the kitchen." Claire mirrored his movements with precision, her concentration evident in the way her tongue peeked out as she worked. "Like this?" she asked, holding up her dough for inspection. Thomas nodded, smiling. "Perfect. You're a natural." Meanwhile, Sophie organized the workstation, stacking bowls and measuring spoons neatly. "This is so much fun," she said, her voice filled with a newfound enthusiasm. "I didn't think kitchens could be so nice." Thomas glanced at the 2 girls, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. This was more than just cooking. It was the start of something transformative. When the croissants finally emerged from the oven, golden brown and flaky, the girls' excitement was palpable. They sat down together at the kitchen table, eagerly biting into the warm pastries. "These are amazing," Sophie exclaimed, her mouth full. "Way better than anything we had before." Claire nodded in agreement, her eyes wide with pride. "I can't believe I helped make these." Thomas smiled, savoring the moment. "You both did an incredible job. I think we're onto something here." Over the next few days, their routine took shape. Thomas spent his mornings investigating the orphanage and exploring legal options, while the afternoons were dedicated to cooking lessons with Claire and Sophie. Together, they learned new recipes, perfected old ones, and began to build a sense of normalcy. Claire's passion for cooking grew with each passing day. She absorbed every lesson like a sponge, her confidence blossoming. Sophie, though less interested in the culinary arts, found her niche in organizing and assisting, becoming the self-appointed kitchen manager. One evening, as they sat down to a meal they had prepared together, Claire turned to Thomas, her voice hesitant. "Thomas, do you think I could really be a chef one day?" Thomas put down his fork, meeting her gaze. "Claire, I don't think you can be. I know you can be. You have the talent, the passion, and the drive. With hard work and dedication, there's nothing stopping you." Claire's smile was radiant. "Thank you for everything," Sophie chimed in, grinning. "And I'll be your manager, Claire. We'll make the best team ever." Thomas laughed, the sound echoing through the room like a melody he hadn't heard in years. In that moment, he realized that these two girls had given him far more than he had given them. They had reignited a spark within him, reminded him of the joy and fulfillment that came from sharing his love for cooking. As the weeks went by, Thomas continued his efforts to secure a better future for Claire and Sophie. He uncovered more evidence of the orphanage's misconduct, gaining support from local advocates and even attracting media attention to the issue. Through it all, the bond between Thomas and the girls grew stronger. They were no longer just housemates. They were a family, united by circumstances and strengthened by love. On a chilly evening, as they gathered in the kitchen to bake a batch of cookies, Thomas looked at Claire and Sophie and knew that their journey was far from over. Challenges lay ahead, but together they could face anything. In that warm, bustling kitchen, with the aroma of baking filling the air and laughter echoing through the walls, Thomas Dubois found something he hadn't known he was searching for: a second chance at life and a family to share it with. The future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. For Thomas, Claire, and Sophie, this unexpected journey had only just begun, and it was already more extraordinary than any of them could have imagined. As days turned into weeks, the bond between Thomas, Claire, and Sophie grew even stronger. The once lifeless restaurant became a haven of warmth and creativity, with the kitchen as its heart. Laughter echoed through the walls as they experimented with new recipes, and every meal they shared felt like a celebration of their newfound family. Thomas dedicated himself not only to teaching Claire the art of cooking, but also to ensuring a brighter future for the girls. His investigation into the orphanage gained traction, and with the help of a few contacts from his past life, he managed to bring the institution's misconduct to the attention of the authorities. Meanwhile, the cooking lessons turned into something more profound. Claire's passion for culinary arts blossomed into skill and confidence. She began to create dishes that surprised even Thomas, her talent and creativity shining through. "This is incredible," Thomas said one evening, savoring a dish Claire had crafted. "You've taken everything I've taught you and made it your own. You're not just learning, you're excelling." Claire's cheeks flushed with pride. "I couldn't have done it without you." Sophie, though less focused on cooking, found ways to contribute to their growing family dynamic. Her organizational skills proved invaluable as she kept the kitchen in order and ensured that every ingredient was accounted for. She even started making suggestions about presentation, adding a creative flair to their meals. One evening, as they sat together planning the next day's menu, Sophie asked, "Thomas, do you ever miss your old life? The restaurants? The fame?" Thomas paused, considering her question. "I thought I did," he admitted. "But now I realize that what I was missing wasn't the restaurants or the accolades. It was this, being part of something meaningful. Having a family." Claire and Sophie exchanged a glance, their eyes glistening with emotion. They had never imagined they could be part of something like this, and hearing Thomas call them family made their hearts swell. Their lives continued to evolve. As news of the orphanage scandal spread, Thomas found himself in the public eye again. But this time for a very different reason. Journalists praised his efforts to protect Claire and Sophie, and the story of their unlikely family touched hearts across the city. With the orphanage shut down and the girls' situation stabilized, Thomas began exploring legal options to make their family bond official. He consulted lawyers and social workers, determined to provide Claire and Sophie with the security and stability they deserved. The day he told them his plans was one they would never forget. "Claire, Sophie," Thomas said one evening as they gathered in the dining room, "I've been working on something important. I want to adopt you both, if that's what you want too." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Claire was the first to react, her face breaking into a radiant smile as she threw her arms around Thomas. "Yes," she cried. "Yes, we want that." Sophie joined the embrace, tears streaming down her face. "We've always wanted a family," she whispered. "Thank you, Thomas." In that moment, their bond was solidified, not just in words, but in a shared understanding that they were no longer three separate individuals. They were a family. The adoption process was long and filled with challenges, but their determination never wavered. During this time, Thomas reconnected with the culinary world, not to rebuild his empire, but to create something new. Inspired by the girls, he decided to reopen the Heights as a community-focused restaurant. The new Heights became a place of inclusion and creativity, offering culinary workshops for underprivileged youth and meals for those in need. Claire and Sophie played active roles in the restaurant, with Claire as a junior chef and Sophie managing the logistics. Their journey wasn't without its struggles, but they faced every obstacle together. Over time, they not only found their place in the world, but also inspired others with their story of resilience, love, and second chances. As the years passed, the Heights flourished, not just as a restaurant, but as a beacon of hope. And through it all, Thomas, Claire, and Sophie remained a family, bound not by blood, but by a love that had transformed all their lives. On a quiet evening, as they sat together after a long day at the restaurant, Thomas looked at Claire and Sophie with pride. "You two have given me more than I could ever give you," he said. "You've taught me the true meaning of family." Claire smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "And you've given us a home," Sophie added with a grin, "and the best croissants ever." They laughed, their voices blending in harmony, a testament to the journey they had shared. In the warmth of that moment, Thomas knew that their story was far from over. It was a tale of redemption, of finding light in the darkest of times, and of building a life filled with purpose, love, and hope. And so, in the heart of the Heights, a new legacy was born, one that would endure for generations to come, a legacy of second chances and the power of family. As the years unfolded, the story of Thomas, Claire, and Sophie became a cherished tale within their community. The Heights continued to thrive, not just as a restaurant, but as a hub for hope and transformation. It became known for more than its exceptional food. It was a place where people could find inspiration and belonging. Claire grew into an extraordinary chef, her culinary skills surpassing even Thomas's expectations. She began creating her own signature dishes, blending her vivid imagination with the techniques she had learned from Thomas. Patrons traveled from far and wide to taste her creations, and her name quickly gained recognition in the culinary world. Sophie discovered her true calling in management and organization. Her sharp instincts and natural charm turned the Heights into a well-oiled machine. She handled everything from schedules to finances, ensuring the restaurant's continued success while making time to connect with the people who walked through its doors. Thomas, now fully embracing his role as a mentor and father figure, found joy not in reclaiming his past glory, but in watching Claire and Sophie flourish. He often reflected on how far they had come together, from the cold streets of New York to the warm embrace of a loving family. One particularly memorable day arrived when Claire was invited to compete in a prestigious culinary competition. Thomas and Sophie cheered her on from the audience as she worked with precision and creativity, pouring her heart into every dish she crafted. When Claire was announced as the winner, tears streamed down Thomas's face. He couldn't have been prouder of the young woman she had become. As she accepted her award, Claire dedicated it to Thomas and Sophie, thanking them for their unwavering support and love. Sophie, too, found ways to expand her influence beyond the restaurant. Inspired by their own journey, she launched a foundation to support homeless youth and provide them with resources and opportunities. The foundation's name, New Horizons, became a symbol of hope for many. Together, the three of them transformed the Heights into a legacy, not just of fine dining but of resilience and compassion. The restaurant hosted charity events, offered internships to aspiring chefs from underserved communities, and became a place where people felt valued and empowered. As the years passed, their bond only deepened. Claire and Sophie often joked about how their story could have been a movie or a book, but for them, the reality was far better than anything fiction could capture. On the 10th anniversary of the day Thomas found Claire and Sophie, they hosted a special dinner at the Heights. Friends, colleagues, and patrons filled the restaurant, celebrating not only the milestone, but also the journey that had brought them there. During his speech that evening, Thomas stood before the crowd, his voice filled with emotion. 10 years ago, I thought I had lost everything. But that night I gained more than I could have ever imagined. Claire and Sophie didn't just change my life, they gave it meaning. Claire and Sophie joined him on the stage, their arms around his shoulders. "We're the lucky ones," Claire said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "You gave us a chance when no one else would, and together we built something beautiful." Sophie nodded, her smile bright. "We're a family, and that's what matters most." The audience erupted in applause, the room filled with warmth and admiration. That night, the Heights wasn't just a restaurant, it was a testament to the power of love, determination, and second chances. As they stood together, Thomas, Claire, and Sophie knew that their story was far from over. They had faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and created something extraordinary. And whatever the future held, they would face it together. In the glow of the evening, as the sounds of laughter and celebration filled the air, Thomas felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The journey had been unpredictable and often difficult, but it had led him to the greatest gift of all, a family that he could call his own. The lights of the Heights shone brightly that night, a beacon of hope in the city. And within its walls, a family united by fate, strengthened by love, and driven by purpose, stood ready to embrace whatever came next. As the glow of the celebration at the Heights faded into the quiet of the night, Thomas, Claire, and Sophie remained together, sharing stories and laughter at one of the empty tables. The restaurant was empty now, except for the staff cleaning up and the hum of memories lingering in the air. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if we hadn't found each other?" Sophie asked, her voice soft as she rested her chin on her hands. Thomas leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful smile on his face. "I try not to dwell on what might have been. What matters is that we're here now, together, and honestly I can't imagine life any other way." Claire nodded, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't think we'd be where we are without you, Thomas. You believed in us when no one else did. And you taught me how to believe again," Thomas said, his voice tinged with emotion. "How you gave me a reason to get up every morning, to keep going." The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a moment, each reflecting on the incredible journey they had shared. The trials they had faced now seemed like distant echoes, replaced by a future brimming with promise. Over time, the Heights became a landmark in the city, not just for its cuisine but for the community it fostered. It was a place where people from all walks of life came together, where stories were shared over meals that felt like home. Claire eventually opened a culinary school, Foundations in Flavor, offering free programs for youth who lacked access to traditional education. The school quickly became renowned, not only for the skills it imparted, but for the sense of purpose it gave to its students. Sophie expanded New Horizons into a nationwide initiative, partnering with local organizations to provide shelters, job training, and mentorship programs. Her work garnered recognition and awards, but she always remained grounded, crediting her experiences at the Heights for inspiring her mission. As for Thomas, he found joy in watching his family thrive. Though he occasionally returned to the kitchen to lend a hand or experiment with new recipes, his primary focus became supporting Claire and Sophie in their endeavors. He was their biggest cheerleader, always there with a guiding word or a proud smile. One summer evening, as the three of them sat on the rooftop garden they had built above the restaurant, the city lights twinkling around them, Claire turned to Thomas with a playful grin. "So you know," she said, "we've come a long way from that first ratatouille." Thomas laughed, the sound warm and full. "We certainly have. But the heart of it hasn't changed. It's still about coming together, creating something meaningful, and sharing it with the world." Sophie raised her glass of sparkling cider. "To family," she said, her voice steady and full of love. Claire and Thomas clinked their glasses with hers, echoing the toast marked to family. As they sat together, looking out over the city that had once felt so overwhelming and uncertain, they knew they had found their place in it. The road ahead would undoubtedly bring new challenges, but they were ready to face them together. Because in the end, it wasn't the accolades, the success, or even the food that defined their journey. It was the love they had found in one another, the strength to rebuild and reimagine what life could be, and the joy of knowing they had created something truly lasting. And so, under the glow of the city lights, the story of Thomas, Claire, and Sophie continued, a testament to the power of resilience, the beauty of second chances, and the enduring magic of family. The seasons passed, each bringing new milestones for their unconventional family. Winter's chill reminded them of the night their paths first crossed, sparking moments of quiet reflection and gratitude. Spring brought growth, both in their personal lives and in their shared ventures. One evening in early spring, Claire called for a family meeting at the Heights. Sophie and Thomas exchanged curious glances as they sat down in the dining area, which Claire had arranged with flickering candles and freshly baked bread. "What's all this about?" Thomas asked, his smile tinged with amusement. Claire's face was flushed with excitement. "I've been thinking about taking a big step," she began. "It's time for me to open my own restaurant." The room fell silent as Sophie and Thomas absorbed her words. Then Sophie let out an excited squeal. "That's amazing, Claire. What's the concept?" Claire smiled, her confidence radiating. "I want to create a place that feels like the Heights, a space for community, creativity, and connection, but with my own spin. I've been working on a menu, and I even scouted a location downtown." Thomas reached across the table, taking her hand. "I'm so proud of you, Claire. You're ready for this." Sophie chimed in. "You've got this, Claire, and you know we'll be with you every step of the way." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning and preparation. With Thomas's guidance and Sophie's organizational prowess, Claire's dream took shape. The restaurant, named Reflections, paid homage to her journey and the people who had supported her along the way. The grand opening of Reflections was a resounding success. Patrons were captivated not only by Claire's innovative dishes, but also by the warmth and authenticity of the space. News outlets praised her talent and vision, calling her a rising star in the culinary world. "You've done something incredible here," Thomas told Claire as they stood in the kitchen after the last guests had left. "This is your moment." Claire smiled, her eyes glistening. "It's our moment. I wouldn't be here without you and Sophie." Meanwhile, Sophie's foundation, New Horizons, expanded internationally, creating partnerships that brought her to cities across the globe. Despite her busy schedule, she always found time to return to the Heights and Reflections, grounding herself in the family they had built. As the years rolled on, their lives intertwined with those they had inspired. Young chefs who trained under Claire opened their own restaurants. Families who had found support through Sophie's foundation shared their stories of triumph. The impact of their journey rippled far beyond their own lives. One summer evening, on the rooftop of Reflections, Thomas looked out at the bustling city below. Claire and Sophie sat beside him, their laughter blending with the gentle hum of the streets. "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if that night hadn't happened?" Sophie asked, her voice thoughtful. Thomas shook his head, a soft smile on his face. "I don't. Because that night was meant to happen. It brought us together, and that's all that matters." Claire nodded, resting her head on Thomas's shoulder. "It's funny how something so small, a chance encounter, can change everything." Thomas wrapped an arm around both girls, pulling them close. "Life has a way of surprising us. And sometimes, those surprises are the best gifts we could ever receive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, the three of them sat in silence, content in the knowledge that their story was one of resilience, love, and the extraordinary power of second chances. And so the legacy of Thomas, Claire, and Sophie continued to grow, a reminder that even in the most unexpected moments, we can find family, purpose, and a place to call home. As the years unfolded, their story continued to inspire countless others. The Heights and Reflections became more than just restaurants. They were symbols of transformation, places where people could come to connect, heal, and dream. Claire, now a celebrated chef with multiple accolades, began mentoring young chefs who came from difficult backgrounds. She saw herself in many of them, their hunger for opportunity, their need for guidance, and she poured her heart into helping them succeed. Sophie's foundation grew into a global movement with chapters in dozens of countries. Her work touched the lives of thousands, offering not just resources but hope to children and young adults who had nowhere else to turn. Thomas, once a man defined by his losses, found himself at peace. Watching Claire and Sophie thrive brought him a joy deeper than any Michelin star ever had. He spent his days supporting their endeavors and ensuring the Heights remained a beacon of community and compassion. One winter evening, as snow dusted the streets of the city, Thomas sat in the Heights, sipping a cup of tea and watching the bustling dining room. Families laughed over shared meals, couples leaned close in quiet conversation, and the staff moved gracefully through the spacey, embodying the warmth that had become the restaurant's signature. Claire and Sophie entered together, their cheeks flushed from the cold. They approached Thomas's table, their faces lit with excitement. "We have an idea," Claire began, her eyes sparkling. "A big idea," Sophie added, setting down a folder filled with notes and sketches. Thomas raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "All right, tell me." "We want to open a third space," Claire said. "Not just a restaurant, but a training center, a place where people can learn, practice, and discover their potential. And we want it to be free," Sophie added. "Funded by New Horizons and the profits from Reflections and the Heights. It'll be open to anyone who needs it." Thomas's heart swelled with pride. He looked at the two women before him, once frightened girls seeking shelter, now leaders driven by purpose. "I think it's an extraordinary idea," he said, his voice steady with emotion. Let's make it happen." Over the next year, the three of them poured their energy into bringing the project to life. The center, named Second Chances, opened its doors with a mission to provide culinary training, life skills, and mentorship to people who had faced significant challenges. The grand opening was attended by a crowd that included former students, families supported by Sophie's foundation, and patrons of the Heights and Reflections. The air buzzed with excitement and hope. During his speech, Thomas addressed the crowd with the same sincerity that had guided him since that fateful Christmas night. "This isn't just a building or a program," he said. "It's a promise that no matter where you come from, no matter what you faced, you have a place here, you have a chance." Claire and Sophie joined him on stage, their presence a testament to the truth of his words. Together, they had built something far greater than any of them could have imagined. As the years turned into decades, their legacy only grew. Second Chances became a model for similar initiatives around the world, sparking a movement that changed countless lives. Thomas lived to see both Claire and Sophie achieve incredible heights, not just in their careers, but in their personal lives. They remained a family, bound by love, gratitude, and the unshakable belief that they were better together. In his later years, Thomas often reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. He never stopped marveling at the twists of fate that had led him to Claire and Sophie, and how they had turned his life into something truly extraordinary. And so their story became a legend, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is light to be found. That family can be created in the most unexpected ways, and that with love, determination, and hope, anything is possible. The lights of the Heights, Reflections, and Second Chances continued to shine brightly, illuminating a path for others to follow. And at their heart was the family that had started it all, their bond unbreakable, their story eternal. As time passed, Second Chances became an international symbol of resilience and opportunity. Stories of its success spread far and wide, from a young mother who became a pastry chef to a former foster child who started their own catering business. Each graduate carried with them a part of the legacy Claire, Sophie, and Thomas had built together. Claire, now a renowned chef and culinary icon, found herself regularly invited to speak at global conferences about her journey. She never forgot to credit Thomas and Sophie, often stating, "I wouldn't be where I am without my family and their belief in me." Sophie's leadership of New Horizons brought her international recognition as well. Her vision transformed the way the world approached homelessness and child welfare. She used her platform to advocate for systemic change, ensuring that others wouldn't have to endure what she and Claire had faced. Thomas, content in his role as the foundation's steady anchor, cherished every moment he spent with the people whose lives he had touched. Though his steps grew slower and his hair turned grey, his spirit remained as vibrant as ever. One summer evening, as the family gathered at Second Chances to celebrate its 10th anniversary, Thomas looked around at the bustling kitchen. Graduates of the program were now mentors, teaching the next generation of chefs and leaders. The air was filled with laughter, the clatter of pans, and the aroma of freshly baked bread. "You must be proud," Sophie said, sitting beside him with a cup of coffee. "I am," Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But more than that, I'm grateful. Grateful for you, for Claire, and for everything we've built together." Claire joined them, carrying a tray of appetizers. "We couldn't have done it without you, Thomas. You gave us more than a second chance. You gave us a home." Thomas smiled, his heart full. "And you gave me a reason to keep going. You taught me that family isn't about where you start. It's about who you choose to hold close." As the evening wore on, the celebration moved outside to the courtyard, where twinkling lights hung from the trees and a soft breeze carried the sounds of the city. Graduates shared their stories, each one a testament to the power of hope and support. Claire took the stage, a microphone in hand, and addressed the crowd. "This place, Second Chances, isn't just a kitchen or a school. It's a promise that no matter where you come from, you have a future. It's proof that together we can create something beautiful out of the hardest moments of our lives." The audience erupted in applause, many wiping away tears. Thomas watched with pride as Claire stood tall, her voice confident and full of purpose. Later that night, as the celebration wound down, Thomas sat quietly in the courtyard, gazing at the stars. Sophie and Claire joined him, each taking a seat on either side. "What are you thinking about?" Claire asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "How lucky I am," Thomas said, his voice soft. "How lucky we all are to have found each other." Sophie took his hand. "It wasn't just luck, Thomas. You chose us, and we chose you." They sat in peaceful silence, the weight of their shared journey settling comfortably around them. The future stretched before them, filled with new challenges and opportunities, but they knew they would face it together. As the lights of the city twinkled in the distance, Thomas, Claire, and Sophie remained a testament to the enduring power of love, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds of family.